All right. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Dan Scheinman, the Bird Conservation Director for Audubon, Arkansas. I appreciate you all joining us now. Um, I am delighted to be talking to our guest tonight, who's Joe Neal. He is co-author, along with the late Doug James, of the book Arkansas Birds. I have it right here, and I use it myself. I've been using it recently for a project. Good book to have on hand. He's also a retired wildlife biologist with the Forest Service. His specialty in the Forest Service was recovery work for the endangered red-cockaded woodpecker. And he's currently a visiting scholar in the Department of Biological Sciences at UA Fayetteville. He also serves as the field trip leader and secretary for Northwest Arkansas Audubon Society. His most recent book is In the Province of Birds, and he actively posts on local bird listservs and posts his photos and natural history on Facebook. And I think it's fair to say when Joe writes, people read it, and when Joe speaks, people listen. He's definitely one of the leaders of Arkansas birding community. And I'm really delighted he took some time from birding to come and talk to all of us today and tell us more about himself. So let's start off with the I should also start off saying that everybody is on mute. If you have questions for Joe, put them in the chat box. And after I ask a few questions, then we'll go to your questions. So, most important question first. Also, if you're on Facebook Live, you can type your questions in the comment box. And my coworker, Uta Meyer, is monitoring that, and she'll direct the questions to me in the chat box. So, first and foremost, most important question that I've got to ask, whenever I'm a part of a job interview for an Audubon position, it's the most important question of all of them, and that is, what is your favorite bird and why?
My favorite bird is the upland sandpiper. And there's a very good reason for this. The first time I read Sand County Almanac, which is more than 50 years ago now, there's a wonderful passage in Sand County Almanac that includes upland sandpipers migrating, through, where Aldo Leopold lived. He described it with such eloquence that I couldn't wait to get out and find upland sandpipers myself. And it's just been a quest for the last 50 years. Every chance I get to see them, they're really the essence of grassland. The great internationally important Great Plains of North America is the nesting home of upland sandpipers. And so it's a key bird. It really summarizes everything you really need to know about the ecology of the Great Plains. So plus they're beautiful birds and they make wonderful vocalizations.
Oh, that's right. That wolf whistle is amazing.
It's a famous wolf whistle, but Bill Shepard told me years ago that he could hear them in his house in Little Rock flying overhead at night. And I was so shocked. That's been like 40 years ago that he told me that. And you know what? I've heard them from my house, from my bedroom, when they're flying overhead at night and migrating.
Whoa, wow.
Yeah.
So Joe, how did you get started in bird watching?
Well, when I was a kid, I grew up in Fort Smith. And I like to play outdoors, play with frogs and snakes and crawfish and that sort of thing, but nobody in my home was a bird watcher. We didn't have any bird watchers in our family. And it came later, and I got very interested in an artist named Walter Inglis Anderson, and went down and visited, got to know his family on the Gulf Coast. And he was a famous bird artist, and I started studying birds off of his artwork. And I mean, I looked at birds before that, but the first time that I was conscious of, wow, I'm into something here that's not just casual, was then. So that was about 50 years ago, something like that. And eventually that led me to Doug James. And so Doug James then became my mentor in actually deepening my knowledge about birds. And then because of that, we wound up writing a book together.
So, well, how long did it take you to write Arkansas Birds? It's
Well, Arkansas Birds started out with Fran James, who is a famous ornithologist who lives in Florida. It was a project that she was mostly working on when she lived in Fayetteville, and she was Doug's first spouse. And when she left to pursue her professional career, the book was unfinished. And she'd done a lot of really good work on it. And Doug basically just handed me that work. And then we started figuring out how to make a book out of it. And I was a writer and not an ornithologist. And Doug is the ornithologist and professional. But the problem was he got stuck on details, whereas I was very much into broad generalization, which, by the way, anybody who reads the R Bird list knows that. You know, I like to generalize about things. At any rate, so we worked, let's see, I worked on the book for about 5 years.
wow.
Off and on for about 5 years before it was published. Had a little desk in Doug's lab back in the corner and tried to mind my business and do my work writing Arkansas Birds. Stay out of trouble.
Do you think there's a need for an update to the book?
Oh, well, let's see. There have been what, 50 species of birds that have been added to the state list
At least.
since 1986 when Arkansas Birds was published. Plus, the sources of information about birds in Arkansas are so much more than they were in the 1980s. It's hard to even compare them. And I'm speaking here about eBird, for example, an unbelievable amount of information eBird. And of course, there was no eBird in the 1980s. And remember, in the 1980s, if you tried to document something like with a photograph, that was slides. The cameras were expensive, the slide development was expensive, and it was really hard to document bird records with those kind of cameras. But man, since digital cameras have come out, everybody's snapping photos all day now. And when there's something unusual, there is a photograph taken of that bird, and it's changed everything in terms of our understanding about birds. And a lot of that, hey, I was on eBird today posting records about Kibler bottoms, and I posted a photograph of a Swainson's hawk that I saw down there today. I posted photographs of the upland sandpipers I saw. I saw a western red-tailed hawk Dartmoor juvenile, posted photographs of that. And, you know, we didn't have any of that in the 1980s. So, yes, we're long overdue for another state bird book, but I don't think not an updating of Arkansas Birds by Doug James and Joe Neal, a completely different book, because there is a lot more known about birds in the state now than there was in the 1980s. Though the information in Arkansas Birds is still relevant and it's still good information, a lot of it.
Oh yeah, that historical perspective is really valuable. That's partly why I turned to it. And as I had told you earlier, I'm actually, with some help from some volunteers, entering some historical records from that book and the publications it cites into eBird to fill in those pre-eBird year gaps in that big database. So yeah,
people ask me every now and then, well, can I get a copy of the book? And of course, it's been out of print for a long time, but you can buy a copy of the book almost anywhere for $20. Like there's a used bookstore here in Fayetteville. It almost always has them, and you can buy them off of Amazon. And the thing about it is it's full of good information. It's just a lot has happened since 1986 in terms of, for example, Dan Shyman is part of the scene now, you know, and you've added a lot yourself as well as, you know, others too. So yeah, can't wait for your new book, Dan.
Neal and Shyman.
Yeah. No, let's see. Shyman and Neal, I think, would have to be that one.
Well, you're the senior author. You're the writer for
Yeah,
sure.
I'll be the senior advisor. Okay.
Do you have any other books in the works? Any other ideas for books?
Yeah, I do have another book. All of my books have been bestsellers, Dan. I've just made a huge pile of money writing books, and there's a big demand from the public for these books. So I'd wake up every day thinking about how I can make more money writing another book. But I do have one that's called Bison Wallows. And for those of you who are interested in bison, you know, they make wallows, the big bulls get in there and they roll around on their backs and they make these indentations in the soil and dusting themselves and make these big wallows, and they're depressions. And then when it rains, they fill with water, and the Great Plains chorus frogs breed in them. And it's a great place to find all kinds of creatures. At any rate, this new book is called Bison Wallows, and it will be hitting the bookstores probably sometime within the next 25 years, would be my guess. So I wouldn't try to stay up late at night tonight trying to get it in line for that book.
You order your copies today.
Yeah, order your copy today. Yeah, you better.
Well, before I turn it over to some of our viewers for questions, do you have advice for a beginning birder?
Oh, I really do. Try to make sure that you're having fun when you go out. Like the joy that goes with it will just open your heart and your brain, and start slowly, and get the best pair of binoculars you can get that are suitable for you. So, for example, Northwest Arkansas Audubon Society owns 8 or 10 pairs of binoculars that are 630. So they're not the kind of thing that you would use or that I would use in the field now as an adult. But for kids, they're perfect because they fit their hands and they have a wide field of view and they're comfortable to hold. And so the biggest mistake that I see in people that come on our field trips and they bring young people with them is they have these terrible toy binoculars that I guess come out of Cracker Jack boxes, or grandma spent $10 somewhere and got them, and they're horrible. The kids can't see anything, they don't work, and they're no good anyway. So I would just say, hey, for 50 or $100, you can get a decent pair of binoculars for a starter. And I would just really recommend that if you are going to take a kid out birding, your child or some of your neighbors or whatever, well, there's a cat.
She's an indoor
cat. But it's an indoor cat, right? If you take them out, try to find some decent binoculars. And we all, like, we loan them on field trips. If we meet somebody, a kid who's really interested, we try to make sure that they get something in hands, because the worst thing that can happen is to go out with a horrible pair of binoculars and not be able to see anything. And then they don't know why anybody's excited about it. But if they get a decent pair of binoculars, then they'll get really turned on.
And know how to adjust the binoculars for your eye.
And know how to adjust the binoculars. That's exactly right.
Well, do we have any questions from our audience? Facebook or otherwise, feel free to type them in. Joe's been birding for a long time. He's a font of knowledge. Take advantage of it.
Yeah, because otherwise you're going to have to hear all this other stuff from me.
Well, I've got more questions lined up for you too. So I know you spent your career working on the endangered red-cockaded woodpecker, which is a rare bird. But what would you say is the rarest bird that you've seen?
Well, Dan, that was not really fair, because that was my rare bird.
I'm sorry. Well, that's fair enough. That is certainly.
I wanted to say the rare bird, but look, I'll pick another one. How's that? A bird that really lit me up. that I was thrilled about it. But it's not a rare bird. It was just rare where I saw it. How do you feel about that?
Sure, sure. Interpret reality
Well,
however you want.
this last winter, when things slowed down, somebody down at Shreveport found a golden crowned sparrow.
All right.
And golden crowned sparrow is a extremely common bird on the West Coast, but it's an extremely rare bird in our part of the world. In fact, there's never been one in Arkansas that anybody identified. And there was one over by Memphis in 2006. And I still work for the Forest Service. And I sat in my office day after day and read these posts from people who went over there and saw that golden crowned sparrow. And I just wanted to die. I wanted to retire right then so I could go see that golden crowned sparrow. So when this bird showed up at Shreveport, Charles Mills, who's one of our veteran, one of our longtime veteran Arkansan birders, even though he now lives on the other side of the line in Texarkana, we won't hold that against him. But he posted a photograph of this golden crowned sparrow on his Facebook page, and I just passed out. And David Oakley wanted to see it too, so he and I went down to Shreveport. And we spent 2 days trying to see it, and we missed it, which was a terrible thing. And when you chase birds, that was a 300-mile trip. And when you chase birds, that's what you could run into.
Yep.
But somebody went there during the week and said it's still there. And we found out why we didn't see it the first time. Because people were baiting it. And they'd spread seeds, little seeds that sparrows like, and then they'd sit way back and just wait. And then the white-crowned sparrows would show up, and the white-throated sparrows would show up, and then Lincoln sparrows would show up, and the field sparrows would show up, and finally, the golden-crowned sparrow would show up. So we went down again, a second trip, 300 miles, and we sat for 3 hours and 5 minutes. And at the end of 3 hours and 5 minutes, one of Charles Mills's buddies said, "There's the sparrow." And I looked at it and I just about had a heart attack. So that's a very rare bird where we are, but it's not a rare bird on the West Coast.
Was that a life bird for you?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, Bill Shepard and I saw that golden crowned sparrow in Memphis in 2006.
Yeah, you're one of those. Yeah, you're one of the people that I'm talking about.
I don't always have that.
See, I was in my office in Waldron trying to save red cockaded woodpeckers while you guys were over there getting the golden crowned sparrow.
I'm lucky I do have some flexibility in my job to go chase a rare bird. When I yell "rare bird alert," it means I'm gone the rest of the day.
Yeah, that's right. That's good. Well, that works fine.
Gray Church wants to know if you've seen a California condor.
No, I haven't. I'd love to go see California condors.
Me too.
It could be in my future.
Could be. Well, do you have?
Yeah, I just was Pooja Panwar and Annette Deshwal just came back from a trip out west, and they got lovely photographs of California condors flying over them.
Oh wow!
Way above them, but it was so cool, So I'll bet there could be a California condor in my future.
Well, do you have any travel planned in the near future after this pandemic subsides?
Well, you know what? One thing I'd really like to do, Dan, the Audubon analysis of how climate change is going to impact the ranges of birds. One bird in particular is probably going to get a bunch of impact that we're not going to be very happy about, and that's Baird sparrow. And I would like very much to go up into the northern Great Plains. So we're talking about North Dakota and then into Canada where they nest. And I'd like to go up there and see them now, so that if the most extreme predictions about climate change actually happen, I'll at least have had a chance to see what their what they were like in their breeding range. I'd really like to go up there and see them. I'm hoping that's not going to happen because of Audubon's work and other people. Even though right now we're kind of in a stall politically in the country about that, I don't think we'll stay in that stall forever. But no, I'd like to go up into the northern Great Plains. There are other things I'd like to see up there, but Barred sparrow would be one of them for sure.
I would recommend Lostwood National Wildlife Refuge in North Dakota. That's where I had barred sparrows and sharp-tailed grouse and Sprague's pipits singing away. It was very nice.
Okay, I'm all for it. You got me. Where do I sign?
So speaking of rare birds and woodpeckers and climate change, I guess, too, how do you feel about the future of red-cockaded woodpeckers that you devoted your career and other people are still working on to keep around?
I feel pretty good about it. I haven't kept up closely with it, but when I still worked for the Forest Service, I went to a meeting in Charleston. And that meeting pulled together all these people that are working on red-cockaded woodpeckers, especially military people on bases in the South, because that's where the big landmass is in these pines that are used by red-cockaded woodpeckers. And they had a 2-star general who gave a presentation, and he said the 4-star called him in to the office, and he said, I want red-cockaded woodpeckers recovered on every base in the South where they occur. And the 2-star said, well, how am I supposed to do that? And the 4-star said, that's not my problem. That's your problem. Oh. And you will get it done. So then the 2-star called in all these base commanders, and they all got together, and the 2-star said, recover the red-cockaded woodpecker on the military base. And they said, how are we supposed to do that? And he said, that's not my problem. That's your problem, because you're managing the landscape there, and that's the law, and we want you to do it. And so, you know, when somebody gives civilians an order, they say, oh, well, I got to go home first, and, you know, maybe I'll have time for that next week. But the military doesn't work like that. And so they've done a wonderful job with red-cockaded woodpeckers in their range in the southeastern U.S. And I think that they're pretty secure for that reason. And the agency that I worked for, the U.S. Forest Service, went through a similar thing with a lawsuit. And I spent my career on the Ouachita National Forest, and I was there specifically because the Forest Service was determined to recover the red-cockaded woodpecker. And that's why they hired me. I did other things with the Forest Service, but they did a bunch of hiring around recovery of red-cockaded woodpeckers, and they've done a pretty good job. My boss down there, Warren Montague, very, very dedicated person to recovery, and the forest supervisor, Larry Hedrick and Jerry Davis and all those people worked tirelessly for it. And I think that's happened all over the southeastern U.S. So I feel pretty good about it. I think, and now in the state, now they're on state lands. Game and Fish is involved, Arkansas Natural Heritage. They're all working on recovery. And so Arkansas's red-cockaded woodpecker population, I think, is much healthier than it was 40 years ago. I think there's a lot more birds, and I think there's a lot more positive management for them. So I feel good about it.
Good. Just a reminder, everyone, if you have a question for Joe, you can type it in the chat box or the comment box. Get him while he's here, before he goes back out birding again. So where is your favorite place to go birding in Arkansas?
Oh, in Arkansas. Well, currently it's the Kibler Bottoms. So that's the area, the Arkansas River bottoms between Alma and Van Buren. And I like it because it's a mixture of the Arkansas River, some lakes, some oxbows, some swampy stuff, lots of agricultural land. and that sort of thing. And there are lots of possibilities. And I've met a lot of friendly landowners down there. I mean, I've met a few hostile ones too, but mostly pretty friendly. And this winter we were down there. I was down there with Vivek, and we were out on Arnold Road. Arnold's named for one of the farmers. Pretty friendly family. Don't mind us being birding out there. And we were looking at Lapland longspurs, and it was a place where we had found Sprague's pipit too. And we were standing there in the road looking, and this pickup truck came along, and the guy said, "Well, what are you all up to?" And we started, and he said, "Well," I own that sod farm over there, West Ark Sod." And I said, "Oh, I talked to you on the phone." Very cool place to go bird watching. Anyway, they piled out of the truck, and Vivek got them on the scope and showed them Lapland longspurs, flock of them.
Nice.
But it's an interesting place. It's got diverse habitat. It combines kind of the eastern U.S. type birding with a lot of influences from the West. And so you see, like, it's a great place to find western meadowlarks in the winter because they come up the valley. And like today, Swainson's hawk,
right,
and that sort of thing. And so it's a good place to go. And it's about 50 miles from Fayetteville. So I always say a prayer, and I hope Greta Thunberg will grant me forgiveness for the climate sins that I commit when I drive from Fayetteville down to the valley to go birding. I know that it's probably a bad thing in some ways, but I try to do it decently and fairly and for the public good and to share the information. And I hope that it'll do some good in the long run. And the fact that I'm burning gas going down there, well, I've got a car that's pretty efficient on gas, so that's maybe a little bit in my favor. But since Greta sailed across the Atlantic instead of flying, maybe I wouldn't get forgiven. But at any rate, yes, I like the Kibler Bottoms right now, Dan. It's one of my very favorite places to go birding right now. But I could make a much longer list.
Right. Well, I'm sure there are lots of great places to go. But Cheryl Johnson wants to know, where's the best place to see red cockaded woodpeckers?
The very best place?
In Arkansas.
Well, I would say that, okay, if you're in eastern part of the state, in the eastern part of the state, you'd probably want to go over to Pine City Natural Area. And it's a small place, so it's fairly easy to get in there, and there are red cockaded woodpeckers there. And like, I'm in the western part of the state, and in that area, the Ouachita National Forest has an area called the Buffalo Road Demonstration Area, Pine Blue Stem Project, Buffalo Road. And if you go to Waldron, you go south of Waldron to Needmore, and then you go west in on Buffalo Road. And there's a whole bunch of red cockaded woodpecker clusters along Buffalo Road. And our website, Northwest Arkansas Audubon Society website, actually has a guide up there to how to go birding on Buffalo Road. But there are red cockaded woodpeckers along Buffalo Road. They're fairly easy to see. If you listen for the sounds, you get up there early when they're first coming out of their holes. They're very predictable.
Yeah, and their colony trees are marked with paint or metal flashing or something like that.
Yeah, they're it's pretty obvious when you get in there where there's a bunch of trees together and they've got all kinds of junk on them and numbers and all kinds of stuff like that. And you can see where they've been driving in a truck, checking the trees and things. Yeah, there's a lot of them.
From the birds to watch from a respectable distance. You don't want to disturb them when they're trying to get into.
Yeah, and right now right now they're starting in on the nesting season. So they'll start laying eggs actually later in the month, the first ones. So we're not that far away. So you do want to maintain a respectful distance, because even though they've recovered a lot, they're still very rare.
Right.
And they are still a federally listed endangered species.
Any other questions from viewers? Oh, well, So much more I want to know from you, Joe, but I'll let you go. And
Okay.
I appreciate everyone tuning in. Hope you enjoyed it. Remember, we have another interview coming up with Sherry Lee Phillip on Thursday, and then Vivek will be up on Sunday, and then Mel White on Monday.
Oh, wow.
So tune in.
Fantastic.
All right. Have a good evening and good birding to everybody. Again, thank you, Joe, so much. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Dan. It was fun.